Welcome back, friends. In the previous session, we have started with the chapter number 1, reproduction in organism. We just go in a brief revision what we have discussed. We have finished a lifespan, we have finished a reproduction, purpose of reproduction, what are the different types of reproduction, the difference between asexual reproduction, and we have finished with asexual reproduction in animals. Now today we start with asexual reproduction in plants. The lower order of plants, those who lower order of organisms which comes under the plant, they also reproduces asexually. And they reproduces asexually by the same four following methods. So the plant reproduces asexually by four following methods. First is called as senescence. The second one is called as budding. Third one is known as fragmentation. And the fourth one is called as sporulation. So first now start with fission. As you already know that what's a fission? Fission, that means it's a breakdown of a nucleus, and then there is a breakdown of a cytoplasm. So this is called as a fission. Usually, these are the three organisms which reproduces asexually. First is algae, second one is fungi, and third one is monera. They reproduces asexually by a fission method. So how they reproduces asexually? Assume that the unicellular algae or unicellular fungi, in that the cytoplasm, the nucleus first divides. So here there are two nuclei are formed, and afterwards the cytoplasm starts to divide, and that leads to a formation of two daughter cells. These are the two daughter cells which grows up and they live as an independent organism. So this is the first method, what we call as an fission. Now the another method, what we call as an budding. In a budding, there is a formation of a bud which is a mass of a cell that is developed from an organism. And here also the algae can develop or reproduces by budding method, and even the fungi can also develop by a budding method. So which algae can reproduce asexually? There are two types of algae which can reproduce asexually by a budding method. The first one is Dictyota and Fucus, and the second one Protosyphon. The Dictyota and the Fucus, they reproduce asexually by formation of adventitious branches, whereas the Protosyphon, it reproduces asexually by formation of a bud. Similarly, the fungi can also reproduce asexually by a budding method. And which one? The example of fungi which reproduces asexually by budding method is clear. So these are the examples. Dictyota and Fucus, they reproduces by budding, by adventitious branches, and the Protosyphon, they reproduces asexually by formation of a bud. Similarly, in the fungi, the yeast will develop asexually by a budding method. Clear? Now we move ahead with the third type of asexual methods in plants. The third type of asexual method in plants is a fragmentation. As you know, in a fragmentation, here the living organism first divides in a fragment, and each fragment that develops another part of a living organism which live as an independent organism. As like the other one, here there are two examples, algae and the second one is fungi. Which algae reproduces by fragmentation? So here are the examples which reproduces by fragmentation. First, Eulothrix. Second, Edogonium. Third, Spirogyra. Fourth, Zygnema. Whereas in the fungi, which fungi reproduces by fragmentation? So here the examples of fungi, they reproduces by fragmentation. Mucor, Rhizophus, and Saprolegnia. They reproduces by fragmentation. Clear? Now we move ahead with the fourth method. That is the fourth method. It's called as a sporulation. So the fourth method is sporulation. The name itself suggests it's a sporulation, means a formation of a spore. And the algae and fungi can also reproduce by formation of a spore. But which algae they reproduces by sporulation? The algae which reproduces by sporulation are Eulothrix, Edogonium, and Chlamydomonas, a unicellular algae. Whereas fungi can also reproduce by sporulation method, and there are two examples. One is Penicillium, and the second one is Aspergillus. In sporulation method, the spores which are going to be formed, the spore can be of two types. The first is motile spores, and the second one is called as non-motile spores. The motile spores can also be called as zoospores, and these zoospores are usually formed in Eulothrix, Edogonium, and the Chlamydomonas. The another type of a spore which can be formed are the non-motile, and they are non-flagellated, whereas the motile ones are the flagellated. The non-motile spores and non-flagellated spores are called as conidia, and this conidia can be found in Penicillium and the Aspergillus. The motile spores, they are the flagellated, they possess the flagella, so they can easily swim in the water, and they can swim in the water for a certain time period, and they are called as zoospores. Whereas the non-motile spores, they don't have a flagella, so they cannot move, but yes, they have a hard coat surrounding to them, surrounding to it, and they can be easily dispersed into a water, like it happens in the case of Penicillium and the Aspergillus. Now let's brief overlook of the different methods of asexual reproduction in plants with examples. Students, you have to remember the names, so focus on the name. So I again repeat, what are the examples of asexual reproduction in plants? As you already know that the plants can reproduce asexually by the same four methods as the animals: fission, budding, fragmentation, and sporulation. Let's have a look of the examples. Algae, fungi, and monera, they reproduce by fission. In a budding, the algae and fungi can reproduce asexually. Algae can reproduce by two ways, either by formation of adventitious branches or by formation of bud. Dictyota and the fucus, they are the algae, they reproduce asexually by formation of adventitious branch. Whereas the prototyphon, it is a algae, they reproduce by bud. Fungi can also reproduce by a budding. A fungi which is reproduced by formation of bud is a yeast. Fragmentation, same, algae and fungi can also reproduce by fragmentation. Eulothrix, Edogonium, Spirogyra, and Zygnema, these are the algae which reproduces by fragmentation. Similarly, Mucor, Rhizophus, and Saprolegnia, they are the fungi which reproduces by fragmentation. Now sporulation. Ulothrix, Edogonium, Chlamydomonas, they form a motile spore, what we call it as zoospore, and they reproduces by sporulation. Aspergillus and Penicillium, they are the fungi. They reproduce the non-motile, non-flagellated spore called as conidia, and thus they reproduce by spiration. Now have a look and try to remember the names. Now we move ahead with another type of asexual reproduction in plants, and that is vegetative propagation. You might have heard this word vegetative propagation while you are learning the 10th standard. So can anyone tell me what is a vegetative propagation, or do you have an idea what is a vegetative propagation? Vegetative propagation is a term which is used for a plant. In asexual reproduction, usually we are applying this term for animals, but for a plant, particularly the flowering plant, the asexual reproductive method is called as vegetative propagation. That means it is asexual reproduction usually in the case of flowering plants. Remember, vegetative propagation is also a type of asexual reproduction. It is not a type of sexual reproduction. And here also, like the characteristic of asexual reproduction, only single parent is involved. And so that's why the offspring which are going to be produced, they are exact copies of the parent. But yes, they are occurring into a flowering plant. I will tell you the most interesting example of a plant which reproduces by a vegetative propagation. And it is a famous example. It is water hyacinth. This water hyacinth, that is also called as terror of Bengal. It is a weed which is growing into a standing water, and they grow very rapidly vegetatively, so it becomes a headache, which is very difficult to get rid of them. We took this weed from the other countries because it has a very beautiful flowers and due to its shape. So remember, it's a very important example which reproduces by vegetative propagation, and the name is water hyacinth and terror of Bengal. You will also learn regarding this in the other chapters of ecology, because in the ecology it has an importance. This weed, they grow so rapidly, it drains the oxygen from the water bodies, and so that's why the amount of oxygen reduces in the water, that is harmful to animals and the other organisms which are living, because the oxygen is necessary for all the living organisms. So it is a vegetative propagation, a asexual method in a flowering plant. When we discuss this vegetative propagation in detail, so the methods which are adopted into a vegetative propagation can broadly classify into two types. First is called as natural method of vegetative propagation, and the second one is called as artificial method of vegetative propagation. So clear, students? How many methods of vegetative propagation? There are two methods of vegetative propagation. First is natural method, and the second one is called as an artificial method of vegetative propagation. In a natural method, the name itself suggests, naturally some part of a plant, they help in the growth or the reproduction of a plant asexually. This is called as a natural method of vegetative propagation. Here, naturally some part of a plant, when it is provided a suitable condition, they reproduce it. So which are the organs that help in a vegetative propagation? The organs which help in a vegetative propagation naturally are root, stem, leaf, floral bud, axillary bud. They help. These are the organs from that a new plant it reproduces. And these organs from which a new plant which is developed, that can also be called as vegetative propagules. So what is a vegetative propagule? The vegetative propagule, that means a part of a plant that leads to a reproduction of a new plant vegetatively. They are called as vegetative propagules. Now let's discuss examples of a plant they reproduces by different vegetative propagules. The plants which use the root to reproduce vegetatively. The examples are potato, asparagus, and the dahlia. The plants which use a stem for a vegetative propagation. The examples are onion, ginger, amorphophallus, etc. The leaf, the example is bryophyllum. The bryophyllum, it uses a margin of leaves, the bud which is present in the margin of leaves that help in the vegetative propagation. Floral bud, the examples are agave and oxalis. They reproduces vegetatively with the help of floral bud. Next, axillary bud. This is a plant, Dioscorea. A Dioscorea is a plant, they reproduces vegetatively with the help of axillary bud. Okay, so here the different plant, they uses the different parts of a plant to reproduce vegetatively and naturally. The gardeners take advantage of this method. They take this part, and so that's why they can grow a plant very easily and in a fast, rapid manner as per the desired characters required in the plant. Clear? So that's all about the natural method of vegetative propagation. The another method of vegetative propagation is a artificial method of vegetative propagation. Here the name itself suggests it's an artificial method, means it is developed by the human being. It does not occur naturally. So why the human being develops such a method of vegetative propagation, a type of asexual reproduction? The reason is when we require a desired plant products in a limited time period and to get the desired characters in the plant, we reproduce artificially, and this is artificial methods. There are three methods which comes under the artificial. It's called as cutting. The another one is called as layering, and the third one is called as grafting. What is a cutting? In a cutting, a part of a plant is cut, and that cut part of a plant is sown in the soil. From this part, a new plant is going to be produced. This is called as a cutting. Like for an example, sometimes we use a stem in a cutting method. Like for an example, in the case of rose, in the case of sugarcane, in the case of croton plants, in the case of chrysanthemum, we use a stem. So what we do, from the rose, we take a part of a stem, we sow it in a soil. From the sown stem, adventitious roots will develop. Once the roots develop, it establishes a contact with the soil, the aerial part grow up, and this is called as a cutting method. Similarly, we can also use a root in some cases, like for an example, lemon and the tamarind. So in some cases you have to use a stem, in some cases you have to use the root. Like I write down the examples which can be grown by a cutting method. The examples which are developed by cutting are rose, sugarcane, croton, etc. In this cases, we are using a stem. Even the other examples, in this cases, we are using a root, lemon and tamarind. Clear? So that is cutting. Second is layering. What is a layering? In a layering, we have to make a layer. So the branch of a plant which is nearer to a ground, we bend in such a manner that the middle part of a branch they goes inside and the aerial part that remains outside. The middle portion of a plant or the branch which remains inside of a soil, from that the roots will develop, and from the aerial plant the branches will develop. This method is called as a layering. And once the aerial part develops, we detach this from the parent plant. This is called as a layering. And layering is important to grow in the case of rose, lemon, hibiscus, jasmine. These are the plants which can be developed by a layering method, and this is the artificial method. Third, the important one is called as a grafting. In a grafting, it is like a grafting. A one plant is grafted on the another one. This is a part which is grafted on the another one, and this part which is being grafted, it is called as scion. What is it called? It's called as scion. S-C-I-O-N. The part which is being grafted, assume that this is a plant, one plant, and this is another plant. The plant which is being grafted on it, this is called as a scion. The plant on which it is grafted, this is called as stalk. So the scion is grafted on the stalk. This type of a method is called as a grafting. And where it is useful? It is useful in the cases where there is a weak root system. In this type of a weak root system, we are using this method. But yes, there should be some characteristic while selecting a stalk and the scion. What are the characteristics of a stalk? The stalk should be such that it has a deep rooting system or it has a strong rooting system. And what is a scion? The scion you have to select depends on the characteristic what you desire. Based on that, to select this scion. The examples of a plants which can be developed by a grafting method or reproduces by a grafting method. The examples are apple, lychee, mango, citrus fruits, etc. They reproduces by a grafting method. So these are the natural and the artificial methods of vegetative propagation. Okay. So in short, there are two methods of vegetative propagation, natural and the artificial. In natural, different parts can be utilized, and these parts can be called as vegetative propagates. In artificial methods, there are three methods: cutting, layering, and grafting, and these are the respective examples. Apart from that, there are specific structures which are developed and they occur naturally, and they can be used for vegetative propagation. I just list out, it comes under the natural one. Like runners are developed which runs parallel to the ground, and it is observed in case of lawn grass. The another one is offsets are developed, and that is observed in case of pistia. Next is nephrolepis. Stolons are developed, and it is observed in nephrolepis. And next, suckers. Meat. They are also a natural one, and these runners, offsets, stolons, and suckers, they can also be considered as vegetative propagates. So remember the examples: runners, It reproduces vegetatively, and that occurs in the case of non-grass. Pistia, it also reproduces vegetatively, and that's by offset. Nephrolepin through a stolons, mean through a suckers. Okay, that's all about it. Remember the example of vegetative propagation. So summarizing today's session, in today's session we have discussed with asexual reproduction in plants. In asexual reproduction in plants, we have discussed the four methods: fission, fragmentation, budding, sporulations. These are the four methods. Another important one is vegetative propagation. In vegetative propagations, we have discussed the natural and the artificial methods and their examples. In the today's session, it is very important to remember the examples of a plant because they are important regarding to an MCQ questions which are asked into an entrance examination. In the next session, we will start with sexual reproduction. In the first two sessions, we have finished with asexual reproduction, and in the next session, we start with sexual reproduction. Thank you and stay tuned.